Hi everyone. So today I'm making a video, and my point is this. People fought in groups. Fighting in a melee for a battle or a siege with a bunch of your mates in a formation was a lot more common than duels. You might have duels before battles or duels between champions, but the fighting style was generally focused on fighting in groups because that's how you won things, that's how you conquered cities, that's how you got new lands, etc., etc. Now I bring this up. It's a number of things I see in reenactment and stuff like that. There's a lot of things I've been hearing is that, especially with Vikings, that they would have their shield sort of like this. So rather than being in front of your body, it's next to your body, and you would fight with a sword, or occasionally an axe, but almost always a sword. And you would fight, chopping, and you could still do punches and parries. You would fight in a formation, or you would fight like this. And my main problem with that is, one, people tended not to fight with swords. Only the very rich had swords, who generally have an axe or a spear, which I will get to later. And also, this, while it might, be a little bit more maneuverable, and you definitely won't accidentally hit your arm or anything, which I don't think is that big of a problem anyways. So it might be very good for a duel. You can't hold a shield wall without shields in front of you. And it wouldn't be called a shield wall if there was no wall of shields. So in actual battle, you would fight like this rather than like this. You can't hold formation. You can't fight in a group like this. This is only dueling. So it would have been far less common. And because most people were taught to fight in formations, only a few people were taught specifically how to fight in duels. So most people dueling would fight in the same way they would fight in formation. They would fight like this. But getting on to spears, which I did mention earlier, spears were very common. And not just short spears. I remember when I did my LARP, being a studious and very geeky young man who is very into history, I started off with a spear and shield. It was a short spear like this. I might actually have the LARP one somewhere around here, but I don't want to go digging for it, because that was a very common combination, was the spear and shield. Fighting like this, if not more so. This is a very small spear, and this is like the one I brought to art just to sort of illustrate the point. When they told me that this was a terrible combination, spear and shield doesn't work. And yes, well, on one it might not work, but it couldn't have just not worked overall, because it was the most common combination of weapons, and not just spears like this, but dirty, great big ones. This is over my head and possibly out of frame. I don't actually know what my frame is right now. Where you would, all the way from here, I could fairly accurately hit the camera. And this is very long. This is definitely big. And this was an insanely common combination throughout most of Europe, and really since the advent of shields, since the Bronze Age, this sort of spear and shield combination was the most common and the most popular and the most useful combination. It was really used on battlefields. From everyone from the Romans had spear and shield, both before and during and after their more famous spear or shield and sword combination. The Greeks used it, the Celts used it, the Vikings used it, the Germans used it, well into the Middle Ages, really from the time where they had the technology to produce spear and shield to the time where they were producing guns. Spear and shield was the most common combination on the battlefield. And then why not? It's cheap, as I showed before. I have quite a bit of reach. But the reason why I think people think it's such a terrible combination is, again, they don't realize that fighting was group fighting. We're too used to sort of single combat. I mean, HEMA is mostly duels because they don't reenactors, because apparently that has some sort of dirty word connotation. I was browsing some HEMA forums, and everyone wanted to distance themselves from reenactment, but so they're all single combat as opposed to group combat. And LARPing is, of course, tends to be smaller groups. Everyone wants to be a hero, like in a fantasy movie. So you don't have group fighting, and this is very much a group fighting weapon. So this is very heavy and fairly unwieldy. So if you just knock my spear out of the way, it goes quite a good distance, and I am fucked. I mean, I can be able to get somebody really close to me. I have to sort of pull this number, and if you're by any sort of trees or anyone else, this would be almost impossible to use. Even just holding it like this is not very good. I can definitely feel the weight on the back. And even then, I can't really use it that accurately. So in single combat, this would be a terrible combination. It is a terrible combination, but it was a fantastic combination. It was the combination that everyone used. If you were a peasant, the weapons you would get would be a spear and a shield. If you were a lord, yes, you would have your fancy sword and such, but you would also have a fancy-looking spear and a fancy-looking shield. Everyone used this combination for, again, the entire time when we had the technology to produce them until we started using guns. It was a fantastic combination. It's great for group fighting. You might be able to knock my spear out of the way, but if I have 300 some mates also in this giant shield wall, you can't just knock all of them out of the way. You have to try to charge through a massive line of pointy things at you. I mean, they're group fighting weapons. You don't want to be caught off on your own, partially because anyone caught off on their own can just be dispatched by less skilled, less equipped people who are working together. Group fighting was the type of fighting people used. But as we want to focus on individual combat because it looks cooler or whatever people think, it really makes fighting less accurate because we're developing all these techniques that would be absolutely terrible at trying to hold a formation. And the most common, the most popular, and some of the most effective weapon combinations don't work unless you're in a group because they were designed for actual real fighting rather than sport. So I guess that's what I'm trying to say. People fought in groups, and realistic fighting was developed for groups, not individuals. It was for the army, not for some local hotshot that wanted to go and get all the glory. So that's how warfare was fought, with you and your mates in a formation. And the people that didn't fight in formation very quickly got conquered by those who did. Even in the Middle Ages, when people had plate armor instead of shields, they would still fight in formations. I mean, every depiction from Greek vases to the Middle Ages tapestries to the Bibles of the late Middle Ages show people fighting in groups. It's how people fought. So the techniques they used and the weapons they used were for fighting in groups, not fighting as individuals. So every time in HEMA or reenactment or LARP or whatever or however you're doing your fighting, when you use techniques like the Viking, this type of thing, you were making it less accurate. You're making it a worse representation of what was going on. And then if you ever do end up fighting in a group, which you probably will, because even when we had 3-on-3 matches, the ones who had the best cohesion won almost every time. And if you don't train to fight in groups, then when you do fight in a group, you aren't as effective. So I've been rambling for quite some time, so I'm just going to shut myself up.